Hi everyone, and welcome to my review of Parasite, the winner of the Best Picture Oscar. And wait, you guys want to hear about the new Doctor Who episode, don't you? Fine, you can have this for now, but the good news is that later this week you guys will get 3 Oscar-related movie reviews. Now, however, we continue to observe the explosion in slow motion that is Doctor Who and come to a consensus regarding its suckiness.
Can you hear me?
At first I was thinking this new historic location would hold some significance in the story, but then I remembered that episode set in Pakistan and I knew we were in for a treat. Not like a nice treat where your mum buys you a magazine in the supermarket, but more like being given a sweet that's covered with hair. And speaking of hair, did anyone else think Slitheen when those big claws wrapped around Tahira's friend? No? Just me? I honestly think they only used this pointless location to throw in a politically charged comment about Islamic physicians, because the budget only allowed us to be there for about 5 minutes and then they're off again. Another great idea seemed to spring out at the prospect of the Doctor going off on an adventure of her own. I think it was when she started talking to herself, however, that I realised my hopes were in vain. We get this super unnecessary catch-up with the companion and the Mertz,
Because we miss.
essentially establishing they're all having nightmares. Yaz's segments had no consequence whatsoever. Graham is playing cards with 2 people the BBC found on the streets, whilst Ryan plays fucking FIFA. The latter part was so cringy that I genuinely considered flicking over to the other HDMI port and just playing some video games myself. It would actually be a better use of my time, wouldn't it? Then Ian Gelder, who you may have seen from Game of Thrones, shows up in quite horrific fashion. Him laughing when Yaz wakes up gave him a really creepy introduction. Then to see his hand separating and fingering everything in sight was one of the weirdest ideas this show has ever produced, and I loved it. Sadly, the same can't be said of his disappearing act, which looked fairly uninspired. Thankfully, we leave Earth's orbit for the first time in this series to be placed inside a spaceship. I really liked this shot, but my cynical mind thinks this was probably where the rest of the budget for this episode went, because the ship's interior set looks god-awful. Remember back in the good old days when a whole episode would be set in one location and time zone? The quality of the nightmares in this episode ranged from piss poor to outright hilarious. Yaz in the middle of a road with her sister and a random policewoman who would later turn out to be the reason she would end up becoming a policewoman. And 50p? It's so bloody cheap. I'd hardly call this character development either. Graham's nightmare that his cancer was back didn't really seem to grab me in any way either. Quite honestly, I'd completely forgotten he'd even had cancer to begin with. Ryan's dream felt the strongest because of the guilt built up from not seeing his best Mert, but was then ruined by the dregs from Orphan 55 showing up. I won't make you guys hear the Benny Hill theme again, but I guess this is what they mean by a sustainable production, by recycling absolutely fucking everything. I kept thinking of that beautiful episode from Series 8 titled Listen, where they essentially established the Doctor was afraid of the dark. I thought this episode was going to build up to a Doctor Nightmare 2, but it proved to be more testicle tickling for the finale. The Doctor then mumbles about absolutely nothing when a genuine match for her, Zellin, an immortal, formally introduces himself. This idea that Zellin is just bored and wants to torment humanity for his entertainment was fantastic, and Ian Gelder's performance really gives him quite a significant screen presence. This theme of mental health got some flesh here, as cruelty to our own minds seemingly makes us unique in Zellin's eyes. The best part was watching the Doctor act as though she did the right thing in setting this interstellar being free, only to find that she just released another immortal onto the universe. The stakes had increased, but I kinda wished this prisoner wasn't just a humanoid. If the producers wanted to put money where their mouths are, of which they have none, they should have made her uglier and bigger than Zellin. I can't help but think of something like the Diamonds in Steven Universe. Just hire a taller actress. She just looks like a scene kid with her creepy father. Ugh. And then came the animated sequence. It was pretty good that they tried something a little different here, but it was so short-lived and expository that I ended up yearning for an animated Doctor Who episode. That would be insane, wouldn't it? This 1-minute segment was not enough to redeem the remaining 48 minutes of mostly crap though. Then the immortal couple arrive on some random street and begin to get horny over people's nightmares. Meanwhile, back on the ship...
So, how do you defeat two rampaging immortals?
Please don't give us the plan. Please don't give us the plan. Please don't give us the plan.
Answer, you don't.
Well, fuck. We might as well end the episode right there then. Then we get the most pathetic excuse for an antagonist wrap-up back in Aleppo, where the weekly shit-slinging began. The Doctor and her army of nobody characters somehow meet the gods, where she performs a 180-degree turn on her attitudes. Last week, she couldn't believe humanity would pollute their oceans with so much plastic, and a few weeks before that, humanity had burned itself to the ground and mutated into horrendous creatures. Now, she's praising them to high heaven with this disgusting guitar music playing underneath. All of a sudden, alongside the power of the Doctor's beach ball, this monster they spawned from this random girl's nightmares has the two gods trapped together back where they belong, and then it's just over. I guess the message to take from all this is that there's only one God, and his name is Allah. I mean, the Doctor. Then back on Earth, Tibbo, Ryan's friend, is sat in a room complaining to, I'm presuming his mates, about self-service checkouts. Look, I do appreciate that the solution provided by this show is useful. Reconnecting with people and talking openly and honestly about what's going on in one's mind is super therapeutic. This is best illustrated by seeing Graham chat to the Doctor as a doctor, but is then ruined by the Doctor's inability to just say something reassuring. It probably wouldn't have been so hard to do if you were actually listening to him, Doc. Listening is just as big a part of reconnecting with people as speaking openly and honestly. It takes two to tango, right? Are they trying to warn people that you won't be listened to by your doctor? I'm assuming they were trying to make a funny joke here, but what is so funny about not being listened to? It's awful. I mean, look at Graham's face. Oddly enough, Ryan and Yaz's first conversation together this series carried some dramatic weight. I was totally on board with this idea that Ryan misses his mates and that he's getting older whilst everyone at home goes on without him. It definitely feels like that when you're an adult. I've been living away from my hometown for over 5 years now, and I can totally relate to what he's going through. For once, Ryan got some character development. Can you actually believe it, guys? So, can you hear me?
Yes. Testing.
It wasn't awful, but definitely didn't blow me away either. It went from awful to great to awful and finished sorta nicely by the end. Ian Gelder as Zelen definitely kept the episode together. It was nice to have a decent antagonist for once. There were a few other nice moments too. It certainly wasn't insufferable, but there's so much of the typically annoying shit in there too that it can't exactly be called a good episode. I do wonder though, with Chibnall being credited as co-writer for the past 3 episodes, if he hadn't intervened in these stories, would we have better episodes? I somewhat doubt it. After all, there are hundreds of other people involved in this show. I wouldn't go as far as to call them all incompetent, but I refuse to believe that it's just Chibnall that's ruined Doctor Who. I give Can You Hear Me a 4 out of 10. Thanks for watching. What did you think of this week's episode? Comment below or join us on my Discord server, where we'll continue this discussion.